fundamentally, it's not about winning. It's about improving. And that's what I mean by performance. So for me, again, it's the 1%. If I can improve myself a little bit, if I can help improving other people or teams or businesses, it's about increasing your performance. It's not about being the best. So again, it's continuous learning. And you know this better than anyone. How do you keep learning? How do you keep improving? Because that will have a knock-on effect for your performance.
Welcome to the Unlearn podcast, where host Barry O'Reilly seeks to synthesize the superpowers of extraordinary individuals to think big, start small, and learn fast. Here's your host, Barry O'Reilly.
Welcome to the Unlearn podcast. On this show, I'm delighted to be joined by James William, a marketing executive with a global reach who spent his time both in agencies and at Coca-Cola, leading numerous campaigns for the Olympics over his stellar career there, before now facing some new challenges in the business and startup world. Now, James has had a fascinating career. He's actually worked on 4 different Olympics, culminating in the Tokyo Games in 2022, where he helped lead one of the most commercially successful but also sustainable versions of the Games with Coca-Cola. We've met each other through Nobody Studios, where he's an active member of our advisory group and an early investor. He also teaches in Nice as a guest lecturer for MBA programs and provides many support to lots of startups and businesses looking for go-to-market strategies, growth, and customer experiences. On this show, he shares a little bit about how he's made these transitions, faced uncertainty, tackled them by having clarity of where he wanted to focus, thinking about people, purpose, partnerships, and high performance. So before we hear about all those steps, let's hear a little bit about how it got started for James.
A lot of it stems from kind of the environment that I was brought up in. So hypercritical kind of family environment, early years, 2 elder brothers, very successful. And in that phase, kind of then was told that I had a learning disability, which turned out to be dyslexia. So it kind of created an environment which I just didn't fit into. And I think that was one of the things that I didn't realize at the time because I hated it, but it drove that kind of grit and perseverance to just keep going. It became down to everything was about results. It was about individuals. It was about results. It was about how we do that. And then I think as I kind of got older and I started my career ending university and then going into marketing agencies, I really started to understand the concept of how do you do this together as a we. That was like, oh, actually, if I work with a bunch of people, there are certain things I'm not very good at. And there are some things I'm very good at. And if I can build those balances, then it doesn't mean as I'm constantly trying to hide that I can't spell or see things like that. So I think that was initially really where I started to go, actually, this is where it is. And then from a marketing agency where I was there for 9 years, we started at kind of 15 in the London office and then got to 250. We were knocking things out the park and then kind of got to a pinnacle there and went, hey, you know what? I'm done. I want to go and do this. I want to try and push myself into another area. And that's how, after a couple of times, ended up working at Coke, and they gave me a call and they said, hey, come and do this. And that was then when I was moving from we to I, because in a corporate environment, it's very different. And that's the point where we got into that before we start into the Coke piece. But I think all of those pieces really impacted the way that I focused and I viewed things.
Well, first of all, I'm dyslexic too, so it's always great to have more people that can't spell on the show. So power to us getting through those hurdles. It's always funny as well when I hear people share that, like the strategies you have to develop, like to operate in a realm where like written language is so important, right? Like I often joke, I had a solid history of D plus as in English literature, and I didn't really know why until eventually I found out actually I couldn't spell, so that was great. But I was good at drawing pictures. So it's fun to hear your own journey with that. And as well as the evolution, though, as you say, is yourself, right? Like working in teams, building your own personal brand over time, being very successful at that, obviously, but recognizing teams are things that help you grow even further, right? And scale your impact. So for someone like yourself, I also love this idea of like pushing yourself in a domain where you sort of feel like you've hit the critical mass or whatever you're going to learn from it. That resonates a lot with me, both. I feel like when I was working as an independent advisor, I felt like I'd sort of cracked the code a bit or whatever. I'd got it as much as I was going to get out of that. And that really was one of the triggers to encourage me to go back and work in Nobody, in not just a startup, but a startup of startups, right? That was a real trigger for me because I was essentially getting bored, to be honest. I felt like I was dealing with the same problems different day and I needed a new uncomfortable challenge. And I know that that's a mindset you have too as well. So tell us a little bit about some of those things you had to unlearn yourself on that journey. Because I'm sure there's a lot of people who like dedicate themselves to a domain, a profession, a business. And, everyone wants to do the best they can on the assignment that they have at the time. So what were some of the things that you sort of learned about yourself as you went on those paths?
I think a lot of it is really understanding or giving yourself permission, because all of your life we're kind of driven to succeed and do better and do better. And therefore you get to a level of comfort, e.g., I can do this. And we all know this. There will be certain things that someone says, hey, can you do this? Can you write this? Or can you create a presentation? Can you do a launch strategy or whatever? And you could knock it out like that. And I think what it is you've got to get to a point where you're like, actually, it's okay for me to not be good at something. And that was the bit that I had to really kind of unlearn, is that success isn't always just linear. It has to kind of be more of an evolutionary kind of circle or cycle. And you've got to be okay with that. And I think for me, it was definitely, that was the fear, because obviously the dyslexia knocks your confidence when you're a kid. So
Right
you've
on.
got to go, oh, no, you just need to keep going up. That's all I learned, was you keep going upwards. And then I think it was definitely in Brazil, probably when I first went to Brazil, and you're in a completely different culture and like, okay, I thought I knew how to do this, and actually I don't. And actually that's okay. So how do I push myself into a place where I'm okay with being uncomfortable and it's not driving me nuts? Because there was definitely times throughout my career where I'm like, oh my God, why did I do this? Why am I banging my head against the brick wall? And I think that's where it is for me, was that's the only way you're going to improve.
Yeah, no, it's great, mindset and philosophy to have, right? Like as you say, it's very easy to fall into the trap of success. Like you say, you get good at things, you especially, right? You're a leading marketer, you know how to do go to markets, you probably do them in your sleep. And I know you help loads of startups doing that now as well at the moment, but it's just a natural almost reflex for you or someone like that. And as you say, it's comfortable, you can get it done, the quality's there. I think I'd sense too in you as well. At some point, you're like, okay, I know how to do this trick, and it's time to stretch myself again and do something different. So how do you start that? Like, what are some of the examples maybe you can think of, like when you started to take some of these uncomfortable steps? Like what helps you know that you're reaching your, I don't know, your local maximum, if you will, and then you're starting to think, how do I start taking on some more uncomfortableness? Because there's a lot of fear people face in that. And I know a lot of folks who listen to this show, they constantly are asking questions like, I'd love to take a risk. I'd love to, but there's an inhibitor there. So what are some of the things that help you get started?
So the way that I always found that I was getting to, as you say, you call it the critical mass, is I was always a great one for feedback. So I used to do this religiously. When I would go into a country, build a new team, at the beginning, I would take a load of feedback. Are you doing this right? Are you doing that wrong? And that would evolve. So over my career, there was loads of moments of feedback. And each time you'd have these cluster of things you needed to get better at. And it was like, okay, great, I've nailed this one. Okay, good, I've nailed this one. And then I suppose when I look at something like when I was in Tokyo and ended up leading the games for Coca-Cola, and if you think Coke had spent, the best part of 100 years sponsoring the Olympics, and Tokyo was the first one where I managed to orchestrate the most successful commercial returns, marketing impact, and most fundamentally, the D&I piece. And that was me, where it was kind of like, now I'm on the top of the wave. Great. Now, to a point, there's a level of, sure, I'm going to jump off now because look at what I've done. And surely this is going to be, the next step's going to be easy. And I think that's the bit where you're like, oh yeah, this will work itself out and what it is. So the way that I did it after leaving Coke, and let's be clear, coming back to the UK after 10 years, leaving a very nice, great corporate career was definitely nerve-wracking. But for me, it was, I needed to set myself guardrails. So I developed this kind of thing where it's like, okay, what's going to govern my choices about where I'm trying to get to? So I set out this 4 little things. It was like, it was what was I passionate about? And it was all about purpose. It's about people. It's about performance, and it's about partnership. So every time I look at something, whether it's investments, whether it's advisory stuff, in some way, some of the teaching I'm doing, teaching a master's down in Nice, each one had to try and fix that box. And, even teaching a master's, I mean, wow, I thought that was going to be easy. And actually, you suddenly realize you're in a very different environment with a bunch of smart young people who are challenging you on everything. And I think as long as you have the guardrails of like, this is where I'm going and I'm comfortable to step into that, knowing I'm going to be uncomfortable, then I think that helps you take the leap a little bit. It's not just like a leap of faith. You're doing it with some kind of structure. That's probably how I said it to myself anyway.
Yeah, no, it's a great way to think about it, right? Like this is one of the things people really struggle with. And I hear people because they ask a lot, right? Just listen to you talk even about a framework about how you're making decisions about where you're going to invest your time and your energy. That's I feel like a really important sort of rubric, if you will, is for people to make. Because you often will hear oh, I'd love to do something different. And then you sort of ask yourself, well, how are you going to make a decision what that different thing is? How will you know it's where you want to spend your time, where you want to essentially, make the investment, make the bet, whatever, take the risk around. So it's great to hear that you sort of built this sort of framework for yourself about, what matters to you, the purpose, people you work with, performance and partnership. So tell me why you picked those 4 things in particular, because they feel like obviously they rhyme and you're definitely a marketer. I know you just can't help yourself with that, but tell us a little bit about like why did you pick those 4, and maybe even an example like what helped you. You've mentioned teaching this master's in Nice. I know you like obviously at Nobody is a bit more closer to home for me, but some of the other like ventures that you're looking at, like how do you sit down when the phone calls come in and you go, okay, well, what's going to make me decide if I'm going to do this?
Yeah, and it did happen that it happened to be four P's. But I think when I look at it and I look at purpose, and actually purpose is a good one when we talk about the studio. So for me, purpose is important, whether it's individual, whether it's as a team, or whether it's as society. We need to have that drive that gives us that goal. One of the things I loved about Nobody's, which is why it was a bit of a no-brainer for me, was just like how fundamentally that is driven into everything that the studio does in the investments, in the startups and all that. So that was great. And that's the same for other things. Yeah, part of it is a lot of learning. I got involved in a startup which was all about trying to prevent abuse in sport. It didn't work. I invested a lot of time and effort and money. It just didn't work at the end. And you've got to get to that point and go, you know what? I need to walk away because it's just not right for me. It's just not the right thing. The other one is then people. And I'm a great believer that you have to kind of inspire, engage, and support people to be the best that they can be of themselves. As you get older, it's paying back. I've been lucky in my career. I've had some great bosses. I've had some not so great bosses as well.
Yeah.
But all of it teaches me to know what I can pass on. And the teaching, so I do that with the masters. So I'm teaching that down in France. And that allows me to give back because it's helping. And I do this with mentoring and stuff like that because that's important to me.
That resonates too. I do something similar. I teach a 2-day master's program. I teach 1 module 2 days at my university in Dublin. And man, it's one of the most rewarding things I do every year. Like you say, students, they're as challenging a group as you're ever going to meet, but it definitely feels like, you're at least sharing, helping. And I get smarter because they often tell me loads of stuff that I didn't know about as well. So that resonates massively too as well.
It's inspiring. I come away and because there's always these, the media, it's like the next generation this and millennials that and Gen Z this and all this. And it's actually when you're in there and I'm like, wow, you guys are smart. Like I've seen some stuff and luckily through my links with Coke and the Olympic world and stuff like that, I've managed to connect those to do projects for them. And these guys are senior in these businesses and coming back going, man, that presentation was off the chart. And I'm like, yeah, I know these guys are good. So It is good. And I do feel it's like you're inspired by these people. And it's like, man, yeah, I want to help you to be better because this is the next generation.
So tell us about performance then. What does that mean for you? Because it sounds like you've grown up even in a family where there was a performance culture right through to obviously Coca-Cola is one of the largest performance companies on the planet. So tell us a little bit about what that means for you, though.
And it was interesting because I had to adjust my thinking in this. So when you talk about unlearning, so what does success look like is the thing you have to change. I had to unlearn. Success wasn't being first. And I think one of the best analogies, and I think it came from the Olympics when I was working, I think in Brazil, and it was Usain Bolt. I can't remember that. I think it was Tyson Gay or someone like that. Anyway, after the race, media guy asked him, "So how do you feel to come second? You know, it must be a real problem running against Usain Bolt." And the guy turns around and he goes, "What do you mean? I just ran my personal best." And I was like, ooh, fundamentally, it's not about winning. It's about improving. And that's what I mean by performance. So for me, again, it's the 1%. If I can improve myself a little bit, if I can help improving other people or teams or businesses, it's about increasing your performance. It's not about being the best. So again, it's continuous learning. And you know this better than anyone. How do you keep learning? How do you keep improving? Because that will have a knock-on effect for your performance.
It's such a great anecdote. It's so relative. It's all about just getting better. So that example you say, that athlete saying, no, I did the best performance of my life. You know, sure, I didn't mind the one, but it's the best. You know, I always see that as well. You know, sometimes, especially with targets in startups or businesses or whatever, where you're set a goal and you get to like the goals to hit that 50% increase and you get to 48, like, did the person fail? Well, no, they did amazing. They it stretched them in a way that they improved, you know, and I see that's a classic sort of way that people can fall into some of those traps. So it's nice to hear you think a bit like that. Before we dive into partnerships, what are some of the things you've sort of like little goals you've set yourself now, right? Like you're essentially an independent entrepreneur now, like helping businesses all over the world. So, and you've sort of gone, as you say, you've transitioned from agency to corporate now to sort of solopreneur. You know, what were the North Stars you set yourself in terms of areas that you wanted to try and focus on?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I after a while I did start to set myself goals at the beginning of the year. And I would always kind of go, what are my personal things? So what are the personal things that I want to achieve? What am I trying to get to? What are the things in a business, work, whatever what am I trying to get to? And each time I would then sit down and look at those and see, how am I doing? Whether that was even so, you know, I've lived in 2 different countries trying to strive to learn the different languages and trying to get to a point when you can operate, which you suddenly realize when you're trying to learn Japanese, just it's not going to happen.
Not going to happen in 2 weeks. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's a Duolingo I'd love, but no way. There is no way I'm getting this language in 2 weeks. So I think it was always for me, how do I find those areas that I wanted to improve in? Again, it was the feedback, it was that constant loop of me kind of going, okay, I want to improve this, whether it was even my physical thing. And actually, I was just away with some friends, and a friend of mine was like, hang on a second, you've got a tracker, even in my personal fitness and health. You got a tracker for this, you got a tracker for this, you got a tracker for that. Why is that? And I was going, because it's going to tell me those one little things that I'm doing wrong. And yes, I might be becoming a little obsessed with this, which my wife always says, I think you need to get rid of one. It does infect your performance. I've got the big on this sleep thing at the moment. So I think it's always, how do you see those goals? What's the short term? What do I want to achieve this year? What do I achieve in 5 years? And what do I achieve in 10 years? And I think that's what keeps me going. What are the things that I want to enjoy doing? The time I want to spend with friends and family? What's going to allow me to do those things and enjoy what I do? And in Japan, I came across a thing called ikigai, which is this
great.
whole, you know it? Yeah.
Yeah, but share it so people who don't know it on the show. Yeah, just explain it. It's a great concept.
It is a great concept to find, you know, what do you love doing? How do you make this something that is something you really enjoy doing? You can earn money for it. You can spend times to do it. And it's like a purposeful way to do it, that ultimately you're doing this so you can do the things you love doing in a way that you're doing it with people you love doing it with. So that started to really cement, like, okay, that makes it easier. I'm not just on this treadmill of just going round and round and round, or the hamster wheel of just, why am I here? Why am I doing this? So I have a choice. I can choose to do in this direction. And again, that's why it came down to the 4 Ps. Is like, if I don't have this, I'm just going to be fishtailing all over the place. And interestingly, when I left Coates, I left in 22. Last year was the first year I didn't write goals because I didn't know what the year was going to go. So I didn't want to put myself in too much of a risk. Now, it's probably fair to say that last year I fishtailed all over all over the place. But it was good because it gave me that opportunity to learn, to be curious, to see where things would go. And now this year I'm back onto goals because I've got a bit more direction.
It's funny you mentioned that too. One of the other podcasts I listened to over the holiday period was where Jeff Bezos was on with Lex Friedman. And it's one of the first podcasts he's ever done. But one of the things that he actually spent a lot of time talking about was this idea of wandering. In a way, like and a very important part of figuring out what your next steps are is actually just immersing yourself in the soup a little bit sometimes and actually making space that you can sort of just explore and be curious in a little bit of an unstructured way to help you then refocus, And I think that's something that's very important for folks to do, is that it can't always be microscopic scientific goal focus on every single thing that you do. Like this meandering is not a bad thing, right? Sure, like anything, you should set a constraint and a boundary around it, obviously, as you have. But I think it's a part of the process sometimes, is just to sort of immerse yourself in some things and go, all right, I'll try this and see what I learn from it, but not to, as you say, like go into 3 years of fish, which would be great fun too.
Well, maybe that'll be later, a bit further on. But at the moment, I still need some kind of, maybe that'll be in 5 years' time. But yeah, it's just the curiosity, because you just don't get it when you're caught up in life. We don't allow ourselves the ability to just go out and try something. Some people are great at it, some people don't, and it depends. And I think the other one is there's this whole thing about, and this was back to the critical childhood, was perfectionism. Like, oh my God, it's got to be perfect. And you're like, no, actually, I'm okay with it not being perfect. In fact, I prefer it when it's not perfect anymore. It takes courage. I think that's the other thing, is people just, it's easy to say, but it's also hard to do. And I think it's just about having a bit of faith in yourself to go, what's the worst that could happen?
Right. Well, best to last probably for a marketer, partnerships. I'm sure you spent your whole life building them, creating them, leveraging them, because that feels a little unique in a way. It's not something I often hear people say. So tell us a little bit about what that concept of partnership is about for you.
So I spent a lot of time negotiating contracts and all these kind of pieces. And there was always a structure to this is how it is. And I guess over the last kind of 5, 6 years, it really understood that actually partnership is so much better. I always used to have this concept to say, hey, we're going to negotiate a contract, but I'm then going to put it in the drawer. If I ever have to get that contract out because I need to find a clause in it that doesn't fit, therefore the relationship's over. So for me, partnerships is where you'd find the added value in that relationship. And I fundamentally believe that as we move forward in business and society, and this is where we get into this cross section of the two, is that's where partnership is born. That's about mutual benefit. That's about shared win-wins that aren't written in a contract, that do have an intangible impact that we can't do. So when in Tokyo, with the way that we looked at the games, was there was tangible goals, but there were intangible goals, which you couldn't go, is that a number? No. I mean, we tried to, clearly. But there are certain things when you talk about societal impacts and things like that we can't track or we can't see, but you've got to be striving to do that. So we know this helped build relationships with a customer, or this helped build diversity and equity and inclusion within this because we've demonstrated that, but we can't say that it's changed stuff. So for me, that's where partnership becomes. I think it's going to become more and more important that we do build stronger partnerships that are built on stronger bonds than a commercial agreement, if that makes sense.
It does massively, I love this idea, as you say, let's do the contract, but if I have to take it out, the relationship has failed. I just think it's such a strong philosophy in business. One of our fun things in the studio is we don't have NDAs, we have non-NDAs that we send to people, simply because, like, if, we're in the business of creating things, and if we're creating things well, then everyone feels good about it, but it weighs into that idea of building great relationships. And so many things are so hard to do. I think it's harder for just one company, one entity to do these big projects where you want to have big impact, right? It's impossible to have everything under a unified sort of bounded roof, if you will, right? Like you need to work with people in different demographics, disciplines, regions, and so forth to make these kind of huge things move forward. So yeah, it's fascinating to hear you talk about that as well and just your philosophy behind it. Now, even in this solopreneur world, right? Like you're doing something really interesting now, right? You've a big interest in ESG and environmental things moving forward too as well now. Like this sort of feels like a another juncture, if you will, on what you're trying to focus on and go forward to. So tell us a little bit about what sort of piqued your curiosity in that space and maybe some of the things you think people might need to unlearn about that area that you've discovered as you've started to sort of wander in it, so to speak.
It's an interesting one. And again, it's built up over years of how you can realize. And I think the bit for me is, and still I think businesses struggle with it, is where you've got this kind of CSR budget, and then you've got a marketing budget, and you've got these two kind of different things. And I know there's all this negativity about ESG and the what that is, but essentially the two aren't separate. It's about how do you put these together, because you can still drive commercial impact, consumer engagement, but also have a positive impact rather than a negative one. And I think if businesses don't start to really fundamentally integrate the two, then it's just going to implode. As a world, we're just going to struggle. And I think the power comes from some of these bigger places. So more recently, again, I'm starting to connect all these pieces where, you can have, for example, in sport, you can have a brand and a rights holder. How do you put together these areas of ESG, again, outside of the commercial relationship, but you fundamentally build on the strengths of each other to have a greater societal impact? So therefore, you're just trying to drive that faster and quicker together, which adds more value. So as I've kind of gone into it, it's just been an area that I felt, I mean, I'm on an advisory board for British Swimming about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that for me is like, everyone's like, well, why are you on it? Because, I don't tick many of those D&I boxes. So actually, it is about the perspective you can bring to the table, because that's what's going to make everyone better. So again, I think all of these elements need everyone to collectively move better. But I think for business, we need to strive to show the value that it can provide and create for the business.
And it's funny you mentioned this. I'd love to say I planned this, but almost by serendipity, our previous show to your show was with Adrian Cockcroft, who was the head of cloud computing at Netflix, and then more recently at AWS, where he ran sustainability for Amazon, right? Starting to introduce this idea of how do they start to track their carbon credits, and the fascinating part that he shared on that show is the mentality of Amazon seems to be very much, they put sensors on the cars so they know exactly how much carbons they burn or they go here, but they haven't got the marketing piece down. It's really fascinating for you to describe it as it's sort of your corporate responsibility plus your ability to tell the story around that. It's fascinating. It's one of the frustrations I think Adrian also shared was this idea of how do you help people? Like technically it's hard to understand what's happening, but to tell the story is a huge part of it too as well. So it's fascinating to hear you share that sort of unprompted, if you will. I know you don't even know that show. Probably you haven't even launched it yet. In fact, it'll come out tomorrow. But it's just fascinating to hear you sort of share that and getting to that conclusion from your own experiences. It's just really interesting.
And that's the thing. When you look at consumers, and especially when we talk about the next generations, they are fundamentally going to require this. So if you want to engage your consumers to buy your products, if you don't have that down, you're not going to have any consumers. And woe betide any brand that kind of goes, oh, it's fine. It's a theme, or it's something that's going to wash us, go past us. It's just not. And I think we need to start to unlearn the way that we've done this and try and change the mindset to know that they aren't separate, that they should be fundamentally embedded, even all the way from your distribution, your supply chains, all the way through. And that's what I think is great to explore. And I think we need to do more of that. And that's kind of where I found that I'm heading in that direction.
Great. Well, that's literally the question I wanted to ask you to close is then looking ahead, like what are, you're obviously exploring this space, you're putting yourself both with this swimming groups and societies and startups that you're trying to help. What are you most excited about now as you look ahead?
Definitely, I think I'm still going to find that one. I've still got a role where I can have that big, sizable impact, where I can drive the transformation and that kind of stuff. But at the moment, the amount of learning that I've done in the last year is incredible. I still sometimes kick myself and kind of go, wow, in the last year and a half, I have learned more than probably in the previous 10 years. That scares me at times. I'm also like, this is incredible. I still have some brain cells I can fill. So I think it's where does that, and I think that's the exciting piece is I don't know where it's going to go. I know that it's going to work out, but I know that I've got the structure and the strategy to allow me to get there. And everyone that I work with and the people like the studio and stuff like that is going to create that kind of, it's just beautiful. When you get those people together, you just don't know what's going to happen. And I think that's what I'm looking forward to. And I still think there's something big that's going to come up this year. And I'm excited for 2024, to be honest.
It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. It's always fascinating to have another dyslexic person on because it's always great telling the world you can do it. Anyone else out there with dyslexia, it can be done. But just to hear your own personal story, right? I love the idea of building these frameworks, as you say, to help you guide some of these big transitions that you've made in your own life from an agency to corporate to being solopreneur now and helping businesses all over the world. I think it really encourages people that you can do it, that just with a little bit of structure and thinking and plotting out what matters to you can have a huge impact in helping you get started. So again, excited to see all the work you're going to continue to do. I'm looking forward to doing more in the studio together. And thank you very much, James, for coming and sharing your story with us.
Always a pleasure. Great to see you. And I will see you soon.
Hey, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that show, but I'm even more delighted to share the exciting news. I've recently co-founded a new venture studio named Nobody Studios. Now, Venture Studio is a vehicle for the rapid creation of new companies, from ideation to acceleration and growth. And our purpose at Nobody Studios will be to de-risk pre-seed stage business ideas. We'll do this by minimizing the time, speed, and capital involved in validating truly repeatable and scalable business models before any significant venture investment. We've an audacious goal to start 100 compelling companies over the next 5 years, and who knows how many beyond that. So if you're interested in radically changing the way work is done, how products are created, companies built and funded, even democratizing the wealth creation and how returns are distributed, this could be the business for you. We're looking for talent, capital, and influence. If you wish to contribute any or all of these, just get in touch. You can follow us on nobodystudios.com, on our LinkedIn page, all the social media accounts, or simply my newsletters and what I'm sharing. We'll be launching a truly innovative crowdfunding campaign, and I'd be honored if you'd be willing to join us on this journey and become a nobody yourself.